Hello and welcome to the Data Slayer podcast, where insight meets impact, brought to you by the team at BLUE.POINT Supply Chain Solutions. I'm your host, Jennifer Doty, and joining me from BLUE.POINT are Anne-Marie Orlando, the Vice President of Clinical Services, Keegan Smith, the Senior Manager, Analytics and Product Development, and Sarah Hobbs, the Clinical Program Director. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you for joining me today. Today we are going to continue our discussion on shortages and recalls, focusing this time on how to navigate them successfully and hopefully build resilience. We touched on this a bit in episode 1, so if you haven't seen it, I will link it in the description of this episode. Otherwise, let's just dive in. So we mentioned this in episode 1, and that's the importance of relationships, open communication, and expectations. So how do these factor into the equation? And Marie, I'll have you start.
Well, I think one of the things that I always think about is that you can't control everything that's going to happen. Yeah, I can't control what my distributor is going to do. I can't control what Mother Nature is going to throw at us, or any other, competing disasters that have occurred over the last, 10 years or so. But what we can do is control how we are prepared to meet these challenges. I think that's the only thing that we can control. And so, that's where there's a lot of prep that needs to go into being prepared for that. Think about everything at the hospital, right? Do you have your backup power, right? Are you testing that regularly? But food, think about food. That's a big one that people often forget, right? Because you just think, well, I'm going to get my food delivery. But if you are in a true disaster, right, food is going to be an issue. Water may become an issue. So there's just a multitude of layers. And then when you think about power, I mean, how many people watch The Pit? And when they lost all their screens and they shut down their connection to the EHR, and they had to go old school in the paper, and the poor, young kids, young docs were like, what? How do I do this? What? And I think those of us who've been around healthcare for a while, we remember that paper documentation. But think about it from a supply perspective. If you were to lose your ability to order supplies through your, electronic devices, do you know how to do a manual order? Would you even know what to order? Do you have the numbers? Do you have the phone numbers? I mean, your account number, all those things you would need to know to make a phone call, say to your, maybe your distributor would probably know. You'd be able to work through them, but do you have the phone number to your, primary vendor of your NICU, respiratory, circuits, right? And you think, oh my gosh, like that's a specialty. I hardly ever call them. They're not going to know me, but I need to know my account number. I need to know, everything in order to get the product catalog number to order. So how do you do that? And do you know? So I think prepping is just so key to any disaster, and being able to meet that shortage or recall or with some kind of resilience.
Like, you think about this, you really can't control the manufacturers, you can't control the delays, you can't control the weather, you can't control any of that. But what you can control is how well prepared you are. And so preparing for that by having lists or backup plans really can really make it a lot easier to manage. So kind of going back, Jen, to what you were asking about the relationships and all the communications, I just think if you have relationships that are good with vendors or manufacturers or anything else that you can rely on to call, or they can help you in a pinch, right? Then that really will help you. But really, it's more the open communication than anything, and just being transparent, saying you need help when you do need help, and not just trying to do it all yourself. But like I said, to me, preparing for those moments is really the key factor in all of it.
And I think not only external, you reminded me internally, right? So your key departments, are you sharing your back order reports with them? How often are you running your back order reports and saying, hey, Cath Lab, I've noticed that these 5, guide wires have been on back order for the last 2 months, or, last month. Should I give you a report every Friday? How critical is it that I get these in? Or are you just going to say, yeah, we've moved on from those products. You can actually delete them from my PAR. There could be, 2 answers to that conversation. So is it an urgent thing or is it something you don't have to worry about, but it's keeping that internal line of communication open as well.
Yeah, Anne Marie, you just hit what I was going to say to a T. I was going to say that it's equally important to make sure that the plan is known system-wide internally for when you do have something. So it's not just one department feeling like, oh my gosh, we've got this problem, because it might stem further. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and they may not even notice they don't have it, quite frankly. I mean, there are some areas in the hospital where it's a critical item, and those critical items are often not used often. But when
Right.
they need it and they grab for it and it's an empty space, that's a very difficult conversation to have or to hear, right? That's that call that you get in the middle of the night, and there's oftentimes it's a very difficult thing to hear. We don't have, you failed us, right? And that's not something any one of us want to hear, right? Because then you're failing that patient too. So
Yeah, so you don't need it until you need it. And then
Right.
when you need it, who's taking care of it?
yeah, exactly.
And it's like education too, right? Like if you have a plan and you let people know what to look for
Yep.
in order to prepare and not have a crisis mode, it helps so that you're not getting those calls in the middle of the night,
Yes.
and educating, like, all right, here we go, like, look for these signs, look for this, like, let's prepare ourselves, let's have these open discussions across internal sectors. And yeah.
100%.
Yeah, it sounds like you have to have kind of a set process in place in order to deal with that, and
Oh yeah.
how the communication can flow. And internally, how does that look? Like what team members are involved, or
I think about that, it goes back to the communication. You really do need to pick who's at the table, right? And so trying to pick who's at the table really comes from the experience of those that have gone through it in the past, right? And so then those people come to the table, and then they have an idea, and greater the group, right? So trying to figure out who that is really comes from, like, think about this COVID experience, right? We all talk about that, but we had some people that didn't know where to go with it, but then they were relying on the experts that knew. And so those experts would be supply chain, those experts would be the nurses that are actually utilizing the product, and what you can do as a substitute if you don't have that product. Like, you have to have that clinical expertise as well. So you bring together the supply chain, the leadership that can communicate, and then you bring together the nursing as well.
yeah, it sounds like there is a lot banking on experience. So having those experienced team members that have either gone through it or have experience in the process.
I think the first line, when you're keeping those lines of communication open, when there is something that occurs, is ensuring that you, one, communicate that, but two, then come up with a plan of how can we conserve what we do have while I research that potential substitution. Because I think that's a key piece. just read something yesterday about the IV shortage, right? That we had a few years back, right? And a lot of people were affected, and cases were canceled. That affects patient care, patient outcome, a lot of things. But one of the things in this article that I did not read was having that conservation discussion. What can we do as, our medical experts, our clinical knowledge, if I need to prehydrate a patient who's coming in for a procedure, in the morning, and I don't have that bag of, saline for them, what can I do to ensure they are prehydrating? Well, that maybe have them drink water up until a certain time. Let's confer with anesthesia. When would be a great time for them to really be NPO, and how can we prehydrate, and how we can use PO fluid in lieu of that. And is that actually best practice? In a lot of cases, yeah, it actually was, and actually had just as clinically appropriate, and the outcomes were just as great, whichever way they used. And it also saved money, and it also was better for the patient, and it also helped conserve the IV fluids. And there was a lot of good things that actually came out of it, and many people continued on with some of those practices that they established at that time. So always be willing to get those people at the table that Sarah was talking about, and have those conversations of conservation. Let's think about that. What can we do?
You quickly find out how much you waste when you need something so badly. And then how are you going to conserve that? And you're like, oh man, this, we recently started recycling, and you quickly realize how quick or how much just trash that you were just throwing in the trash that you weren't really sorting through and saying, well, this is plastics. And then all of a sudden you have all these plastics growing. So I mean, it's kind of, it goes back to that. Like, it just points you out, it points out what you do waste, and how you can conserve it based off of just mindfulness and thoughtfulness of how you're utilizing the products.
Right.
And again, it comes to experience. Still comes down to that. As well as how critical is the response time to when, I mean, it sounds like something that obviously the sooner you react, the better the outcome. But I feel like in this scenario, there might be times where you don't know when that tipping point is. Even going back to your example, the IV fluid shortage, Anne-Marie, how did that factor in the response time?
Part of the preps and part of that discussion is going to also be understanding what are the critical items in your facility, right? What are those items where if I didn't have that, there's maybe not a lot of companies that are producing it. Maybe there's not a lot of options for the special population that I happen to serve. Like, think about your NICU, little babies, right? You can't just go to an adult hospital and say, oh, can I borrow XYZ? It's not going to be the same. They're very specialized. And so you have to look at that. So definitely working with those departments to identify what in those departments, if they didn't have, everything stops. Like, there is no substitute, period. So I think you have to start there. And then for those items that there are no, if they didn't have that item, there's nothing they could do, and they would have to stop. Is there other providers of that particular item that you're out of? And is there a relationship, instead of being committed to one? And I know this is controversial. A lot of places want you to commit to one, either manufacturer or whatever. But is there room, build in room in that contract, so you can already have a relationship set up with a secondary supplier, so that if things go awry with one, you have that secondary relationship already established, and and understand what their capabilities are too. So can they scale up in the case of a shortage or a disaster? But I think what we found out during that time was people didn't have that secondary relationship established. And so it was very difficult to establish it in the middle of the disaster. And that's no fault of anyone's. That's the nature of, there wasn't they weren't prepared to take on the amount of business that was available. So think about things like that when you're going through your lists of, and identifying those critical items. How can you establish a potential secondary partner in that? And build your list of subs. You should always have that. Because what happens is, in another year, it may, God forbid it happens again, but, in another year, maybe I'll be looking for another sub for the same thing. All right. Everything in supply chain, I feel, is cyclical at some point. So
It sounds like you have to have a backup plan for your backup plan.
yeah.
Yeah, and keep those
Yeah.
updated.
Yep.
Well, and it's good too to have that backup plan, but to also kind of practice it. Like, it's hard to throw out if you're having a fire drill, people tend to ignore those drills, right? Because, or it's another drill. But when it's real, people don't know what to do. So it's kind of one of those, like, you need to continually keep it at the forefront of your mind where you're talking about it and you are actively addressing these potentials, the potential shortage. And like, you can't send an email to the group and like as a mock shortage and say, hey, we're short on this, because then you would have massive freak out moments, right? And then it would be bad. But you can also start educating and send out those communication points that say, hey, if this happens, this is what we do, just so that you're aware, and to keep that education going. Because it's not just, you don't have just the clinicians that are doing it. Ultimately, it's the patients that are affected by all of it. And so how are we going to educate prior to and prepare prior to that, to where when the shortage hit, the speed matters and we can get it done because we know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it.
And you made me think about, if for speed to, solving the issue, some people do warehouse certain items, right? And if you're lucky enough to have a space where you can, have your own little stockpile, don't be afraid to work, or I shouldn't say don't be afraid. You have to take that stockpile and make it part of your general rotation. Don't just put it in a corner and forget about it. Because what's going to happen is the product will outdate, the quality of the product will decrease. It may not offer the same safe operation and safe results as you would expect. So if you are doing that kind of stockpiling, make sure it does get into general rotation. It's really important. And then, I do have to plug, FEMA has several free ICS courses, so incident command. So if there was a disaster, but they have tabletop exercises you can do. And think about your supplies. If you were to run it in your value analysis supply chain department, even if you just keep it to that department, do some tabletops. Practice does make perfect. It gives everyone kind of a preview of, okay, so if this happens, here are my first 3 steps. Here's the three critical things I need to understand, in this case. And the scenario may play out depending on what it is. If it's a, neurosurgical sponge, right? Recall, it may be a little harder to map out, but plug in anything, any kind of shortage. Where am I going to go? How do I find my backup manufacturers, or maybe my secondary partners for that? and who are the physicians and surgeons or clinicians and departments I need to engage with immediately in that area. How can I look that up? And so make sure people know who they need to contact, what are those top 3 priorities, and practice it. Walk it through. It doesn't have to be a real one. It can just be, part of your meeting.
That reminds me of those choose your own adventure books. Sounds like it's almost that. Like it would, the chapter would start with a scenario, either, a hurricane or a conflict breaks out in another country, and then this is the result, and which option are you going to choose, and then kind of follow down that path, and then maybe stop and say, that wasn't the right way. Let's go back and do it again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got it.
At the end of the day, really, nobody ever looks back and says, wow, we were way too prepared for that shortage, right? They're not going to say that. So when you think about it, really, those all of the challenges that you've prepared for, it's just gotten through you. It's gotten you through it a lot smoother, and there's not the panic. And so that's where all of the clear communication and the best practice of practicing the shortage before it happens, to where then you can look back and say, hey, we did that. We did pretty good with that. But what can we learn from it now, right?
Yeah.
And we were prepared, but there's something else. Like, what if we aren't in this scenario? So just you grow it, right? So
yeah, having to have that critical thinking aspect, but also flexible in it.
Yeah. It's to really kind of try to have a playbook, right? Have something that is identified where in your organization you can go to specifically in that playbook, and it try to keep it updated as much as possible, but have those lists of phone numbers, have those lists of people, have the people that are coming to the table, have that information, and to have it readily available for those that need it. And if you've practiced enough, then they know where it is, right? But have at least a couple of people that know where that playbook is, where you can go and grab it and say, here's the list, here's what we need to do in this situation.
I think that knowledge is power. And so one thing I do subscribe to on an RSS feed is FDA recalls, because it's I don't have to think about it. So it just comes to my email, and it goes into a little bucket. Now I have to remember to go look at it, but and I do need to do a better job of that. But it is nice because it automatically will come in and say, we issue a level 1 recall on this, a level 3 recall on that, and gives you all the information that's related to it. So because sometimes, where those notifications go, it may not be clear. So you should also think about that process of how, even if it's a recall situation, where does that notification come in from? So do you have a general recall mailbox? I think that's important, right? So that there's a lot of visibility and several people have eyes on that. Or is it just coming into, say, Keegan's mailbox, and then maybe she's on vacation and it sits in her mailbox for a little bit, right? Or, and sometimes there's a disconnect between your manufacturer and you, and you may not get notified. So making sure that, again, if that recall is issued through, the FDA, I think that's a really good one to subscribe to.
I'll make sure to get a link to that in our episode description as well, for anyone if you want to go and check that out. And also, is there any way we can bring this back? We are the data slayer. So how can you leverage data to help you in this preparation and education?
I think we kind of touched base with it, right, on our part 1 of this, is just looking for those trends, being able to say, okay, like in this natural disaster, we saw this starting to fall down, or, oh, we know this area is going to get hit with hurricanes. What comes from this area? Like starting to really understand the environment and the outside factors that play into how you receive your products, and then looking at that data, looking at those trends, being prepared, looking at the spend, because I mean, if spend is going up or something, that could indicate like, hey, we're gonna start seeing, supply go up even more, and having it be hard to get that supply. So just looking at that will help, I think, data wise.
I know there was a time we didn't need to know the origin of the plants, of the manufacturing plants. We didn't need to know where the raw materials were pulled from. That was not a need to know basis. It was like, yep, it just shows up at the dock and we're good. And it's not like that anymore, right? So Keegan, to your point, if there was something that happened in this part of the world, what products can I pull out of my ERP that originate from there, or what raw materials could potentially be affected, and be able to get those that list. And it is all about the data. So how you're setting up your system and what type of information can you input into there so that you are able to then extract it.
Absolutely. All right. Any last thoughts before we conclude our shortages and recalls podcast?
Well, I can kind of go back to, what we were talking about at the beginning is what you can't control. To keep in mind, just you can't control the storm, but make sure that your supply chain has the umbrella, right? So then you are covered. Don't be caught without that umbrella.
Yeah.
So prepare.
Yeah.
Very good advice.
Yep, you got it.
All right. Well, that sounds like a wrap on today's episode.
Awesome.
Thank you all for participating, and everyone out there listening and watching our podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you are enjoying this episode so that you will be informed when our next episode airs. And for more information, you can visit our website at bluepointscs.com or any of the links in our podcast or video description. And remember, best practice does not have to cost more when you slay your data with BluePoint. Until next time, bye.
Bye.
Anyways.
We got a blue theme going on today.
I know, that's right.
Hey.
I'm breaking it
man.
up. I'm
No,
green.
that's okay. It's probably
It's
better
good.
that someone's breaking it
I do
up,
have
'cause-
green under. My tank top
Oh,
is
so
there
green.
you
So
There
like,
you go.
So you tie us all together.
yeah.
That's right.
I'm not gonna make you never mind.
That's funny. Yeah, keep it PG, okay?
Right.